So, was the First World War just a terrible accident, a tragic chain of miscalculations, or was it something else? Today we're cracking open a really controversial book, Lord Milner's Second War, and it makes a shocking claim that the Great War wasn't an accident at all, but the end result of a decades-long plan put into motion by a very powerful, very secret group. All right, let's get into it. So, where does a wild theory like this even come from? Well, it all leans heavily on the work of a respected Georgetown historian, Carroll Quigley. This quote right here is the cornerstone of the whole argument. He's saying, point blank, that this secret network is real, and that he's actually seen their private records. And the craziest part? Quigley wasn't even against them. He just thought they were too important to stay hidden from history.
And the book gives this secret network a name, the Rhodes-Milner Secret Society. The whole idea is that this group, kicked off by the famous diamond tycoon Cecil Rhodes, was the real power behind the curtain, pulling the strings of British policy for like half a century. Okay, to get our heads around this, we're going to break it down into 5 parts. First, we'll look at the original vision. Then, how a new, much more ruthless guy took over. We'll get into the sneaky ways they allegedly took control of the government, how that led to war, and finally, what the book claims was their ultimate world-changing endgame. So, everything starts with one man in his absolutely massive ambition. Let's dig into the founder, Cecil Rhodes, and the big idea that supposedly fueled this whole operation. And listen, this isn't some rumor or secondhand gossip. These are Cecil Rhodes's own words from a document he called his Confession of Faith. The book basically treats this as the society's mission statement. It's this bizarre, toxic mix of believing in racial superiority on one hand, and on the other, this almost utopian dream of ending all war by just taking over the entire planet. An idea that big, well, maybe it's big enough to justify a plan just as terrible. But Rhodes was the ideas guy, the dreamer. The book argues he knew he wouldn't be around to see it all happen. He needed a successor, someone who could take these grand visions and turn them into cold, hard, ruthless action. And he found his man, Lord Milner. So, after Rhodes died, Lord Milner steps up and takes charge, and he's painted as the complete opposite of a dreamer. He was a cold, calculating strategist, and for more than 20 years, right in that critical run-up to 1914, he was the one calling the shots. If you want to understand the book's take on Milner, all you really need are these 2 little words. During the Boer War in South Africa, when asked about the enemy, his policy was simple: delenda est. Now, delenda est isn't just we must win, it's a direct quote from Roman history about their enemy, Carthage. And the Romans didn't just defeat Carthage. They burned it to the ground, enslaved everyone, and poured salt on the fields. They wiped it off the face of the earth. So when Milner uses that phrase, the author is saying, this isn't just a tough guy. This is a fanatic, someone willing to totally eradicate anything or anyone that stands in his way. Okay, so you've got this fanatic in charge of a secret society. How in the world did they get enough power to actually start a world war? Well, according to the book, it was all about a slow, deliberate takeover from the inside, using deception and infiltration at the very top. The book lays out a whole playbook here. First, you control the story, right? So they allegedly took over the foreign desk of the Times newspaper, the most powerful paper in the world back then. Then you get your own people into key positions in the Foreign Office. You use your connections, like a guy named Lord Esher, who was tight with the king. And then the final move, a secret backroom deal called the Relugus Intrigue to make sure their guys got the most important jobs in the government, Foreign Secretary and Secretary of War. And this theme of deception is absolutely central to the author's argument. A perfect example is the deal with France in 1904. The public story was, oh, we're just working together to protect Morocco's independence. But the book claims there were secret clauses that said the exact opposite. They were literally planning to carve up Morocco between France and Spain. It's a classic bait and switch. Say one thing out loud and do the complete opposite in secret. And according to the source, this deception went all the way to the top. They were even lying to their own government. The new Foreign Secretary, Sir Edward Grey, supposedly starts secret military planning with France without telling the rest of the British cabinet. At the same time, the Secretary of War, Richard Haldane, builds a whole new army. The cover story he sells to Parliament is that it's for defending India. But the book argues its real, hidden purpose was to be ready for a massive land war in Europe. So,
All the pieces are on the board. They have a secret plan, their people are in power, and they have an army waiting in the wings. So what's next? Well, this is where the book argues they started to actively provoke and manipulate events to steer Europe directly into a war. The author presents this timeline not as a series of accidents, but as a deliberate sequence. The Boer War is like a test run for Milner's ruthless tactics. In 1905, the backroom deal puts their men in charge. In 1911, they use a crisis in Morocco to get the press to paint Germany as the bad guy, and that leads to 1914. From this viewpoint, the assassination in Sarajevo isn't the cause of the war. It's just the perfectly convenient spark they needed to light a fuse they had already spent years laying. And the author is quick to point out that this wasn't some fringe conspiracy theory even at the time. He cites people like this journalist who was writing back then, essentially asking, hey, is the press trying to start a war with Germany? People were noticing that something felt off. This really gets to the core of the question. Why did an assassination in the Balkans drag the entire planet into war? The book's answer is those secret commitments. It argues that Sir Edward Grey had made these military promises to France and Russia, promises that Parliament and the public knew nothing about. They acted like a tripwire. The second that small, regional conflict kicked off, these secret alliances guaranteed it would automatically explode into a world war. But why? Why would anyone want to engineer such a catastrophe? This brings us to the final and biggest part of the book's theory, what they wanted to build from the ashes, their new world order. The argument is that the war itself was just a tool, a horrifyingly brutal tool designed to smash the old system of competing European empires. The goal was to replace it with a new Anglo-American power structure. They would do this by linking up with big American bankers like J.P. Morgan, creating powerful think tanks, some of which are still huge today, like the Council on Foreign Relations. And, get this, they were even prepared to let the British Empire fade away once it had served its purpose. So the book's final massive claim is that this isn't just a history lesson about World War I. It alleges that this network has kept operating for over a century as a kind of international cabal that isn't loyal to Britain or America or any nation, only to its own grand design. So, to wrap it all up, the case laid out in this book is that the Great War was anything but an accident. It was the result of a deliberate, long-term plan, a plan that started with the vision of Cecil Rhodes, was put into action by the ruthless Lord Milner, and was achieved by infiltrating the government, manipulating the media, and setting up secret diplomatic traps that made a world war all but inevitable. The author connects all these dots and presents a pattern that is frankly chilling, arguing it was all by design. The alternative, of course, is that history is just a series of tragic, colossal blunders. And the question that leaves us with is a big one. Do we control our history, or are we just living out a story that was written for us a long, long time ago?